Test 1, 2, 2. Testing and checking 1, 2.
going first?
No, I'm going last. So I don't need to do this, but I can. I just want to make sure they're here.
Who else is on this morning panel?
Deborah, Ruth, myself, and I think Patrick is as well.
Okay, let me ask Deborah.
Good morning. So happy that you have come to be part of our inaugural conference on visual and performative ethnography at Penn. We're excited to begin on a public level many of the conversations that we've been having among faculty and among students, and we had a real treat yesterday afternoon and evening. Keisha Fikes started us off with an embodied knowledge workshop in which she led us through a guided meditation and really helped us to slow down our interpretive internal processing. And it raised questions about how we know what we know and how we translate these kinds of internal states to a research question and a research process. And I think it was really productive. People had a very good time. It also reminded us that paying attention to the sensuous allows us to experience other people and practices not as objects, but as part of relational intersubjective processes. And Patrick's performance and presentation of Sweet Tea was phenomenal, and it served as a really wonderful example of how moving from genre to genre, from book of oral histories to staged reading to produced play to now film, that how this kind of movement and translation changes not only the meaning of the words and the oral history narratives, but also raises different kinds of questions, ethical questions, within each of the genres. So we feel like they really started us off with the questions that will, and the areas of inquiry that we'll go on to really explore today with our stellar lineup of scholars and artists and advocates. People will be coming in and out through the day. And so let me just tell you a few things about how this initiative started. It really began as the result of a series of conversations among faculty and some of our graduate students who have been working through the medium of film and also working through art and performance as part of their ethnographic research methods and theory building practices. And some of you know that in my previous life, I was a professional dancer and theater artist, and John Jackson entered anthropology through film. So we've been really excited about supporting students who are interested in doing that kind of work, and to try to find institutional spaces here at Penn through which that can really be developed. Those of us who are anthropologists have been aware that over the last 20 years, other fields have picked up on our methodological bread and butter, ethnography. And we've seen this not only within the humanities and social sciences, but also in professional schools, fine arts, and architecture. Whether in business, medicine, law, photography, sculpture, performance art, qualitative social science methods have become more common as scholars and practitioners seek insights into the everyday worlds and ideas of those with whom they work. At the same time, we know that new developments in technology, including inexpensive cameras, certainly iPhones, editing software, and other kinds of internet platforms for sharing work, have made new representational techniques widely available and familiar, and especially for our students who are much more adept at this kind of stuff than we are. So for many of us, this has had important effects on the ways that we teach, the kinds of assignments we require, and on the forms our own research takes. And it's also led us to pose questions about what scholarship will look like in the 21st century and what roles our universities should have as we face these new challenges and opportunities. So with support from the School of Arts and Sciences and a private donation, we convened a faculty working group that met regularly throughout last year to discuss issues and questions related to our terms, visual, performative, ethnographic, and to also think through how other institutions have conceptualized and created space for non-text-based scholarship. One of the questions that we kept stumbling around had to do with criteria and standards for evaluating this kind of scholarship, as well as how to make this kind of work legible to other institutions as our students complete their degrees and go on the academic job market. So we felt that addressing these kinds of issues publicly with others would help us to think through what would work for us here at Penn. And this is the origin story for this conference. So these are the questions we want to think through today. How are we thinking about what the digital age means for humanistic, social scientific, and professional inquiry and practice in today's world? What tools for research and communication should we offer the next generation of PhD students, and how do we prepare them and others to assess non-text-based research? And what can our universities do to facilitate 21st century multimodal research? So before we start probing these questions, I want to offer a few words of thanks. We're so appreciative of the Provost Interdisciplinary Seminar Fund for making this endeavor possible, and for the financial and intellectual support from the deans of the Graduate School of Arts and Sciences, School of Social Policy and Practice, Penn Law, the Graduate School of Education, and the Annenberg School for Communication. And while I'm standing up here welcoming you, I'm only one representative of the amazing faculty who make up our working group. So I want to extend heartfelt thanks to each of them. course, pulling off a conference like this requires the assistance of 1 million people, but I want to thank Atiraj Dattatreyan, especially for his incredible caring and efficient planning and foresight. He's been wonderfully proactive and intellectually engaged and has arranged everything so that things can run smoothly for the duration of our time together, even as he's been on the job market. Gabriel's also one of the founding members of CAMRA, a graduate student-run collective that's designed to foster interdisciplinary collaborations among scholars, artists, and educators interested in multimodal research and representation. And we lean heavily on CAMRA for assistance and collaboration. And you'll see members of the group today helping with the live stream, the Twitter feed, the installation that you see out there, and documentation of this event. I also want to thank Diego Arizpe-Bazan, who built the website for the conference, again, despite being in the middle of preparing his field statements and his proposal defense. Many thanks to Julian Siggers for allowing us to convene in this beautiful room, free of charge. To Jen Mikos for the wonderful catering last night and today. Tina Thompson, who oversees this room and who's helped us as well with our various technological needs. For our technical assistance staff up there in the balcony, and to the staffs of the Anthropology and Africana Studies departments for help with publicity. On behalf of my co-organizers, Regina Austin, John Jackson, and Stanton Wortham, I want to finally say how excited we are to have you all here, and to also welcome those of you participating through the HowlRound live TV network. So let me now introduce Anita Allen, who's our Vice Provost for Faculty and the Henry R. Silverman Professor of Law and Philosophy, and she's going to offer some welcoming remarks. Dr. Allen is an expert on privacy law, bioethics, and contemporary values, and is recognized for her scholarship about legal philosophy, women's rights, and race relations. She's a graduate of Harvard Law School and received her PhD in philosophy from the University of Michigan. In 2010, she was appointed by President Barack Obama to the Presidential Commission for the Study of Bioethical Issues. Her books, which are numerous, include Unpopular Privacy, Everyday Ethics, Privacy, Law, and Society, The New Ethics, Why Privacy Isn't Everything, and Uneasy Access, Privacy for Women in a Free Society. She has also co-edited a volume called Debating Democracy's Discontent, and she's published more than 100 scholarly articles, has contributed to popular magazines and blogs, and has frequently appeared on nationally broadcast television and radio programs. Allen has served on numerous editorial and advisory boards and on the boards of a number of local and national nonprofits and professional associations, including the Hastings Center, EPIC, from whom she received a Lifetime Achievement Award last year, and the Basildon Center. She's also been a source of really incredible support for us here at Penn, and our years here have been much sweeter because of her interventions. So we're thrilled to have her here with us this morning. Please join me in welcoming Anita Allen.
Good morning, everybody. I'm really happy to be here to offer a brief welcome on behalf of the Office of the Provost. The Office of the Provost is very, very supportive of efforts like this one. I mean, this conference is a perfect example of the ideals of the university, integrating knowledge and pushing innovation. And what a wonderful way to fulfill the university's mission and priorities. Thank you, Deborah and Regina and Stanton and John Jackson, Dean John Jackson, for all the work that you put into making this conference possible. I wanted to say a little bit, as Deborah mentioned, I am a privacy law and ethics scholar. Maybe junkie might be a better word, but I'm really interested in the ways in which we handle this concept of privacy, its history, its ethics, its context. So I just wanted to make a couple of brief comments, if I could, about the camera and the damage and the good things that cameras can do, because I've been very, very interested in this topic, and it does relate very much to what you guys are interrogating in these couple of days. So the bad that cameras can do. There was a doctor down in Baltimore, Dr. Nikita Levy. He was an Afro-American doctor who had hundreds of patients and was beloved by his patients. He was deemed one of the best OBGYNs in the East Baltimore clinic run by Johns Hopkins University. And Dr. Levy was discovered in 2013 to have been secretly recording his OBGYN patients as they lay there on the on the little bed with the stirrups. He had a little secret camera he kept in his pocket. And so for years, he videoed his patients. Well, he was found out because one of his nurses was curious about what these little devices were she always saw. So she kind of pilfered one and she took it home and she looked at it and she was horrified by what she saw. Johns Hopkins immediately sent in a security to investigate, and the doctor quickly admitted, yes, I was doing this, and he was promptly escorted out of the office and never returned. He went home, he went to his house, he wrote a note to his wife saying, I'm going to spare you the shame, and he committed suicide. When the police came to his home, they found a whole bank of servers in his home. He was apparently turning his patients into pornography. He was serving up pornography to the world. Cameras, video technology, digital technology can make it all too easy for us to invade, to violate, to destroy. I actually went to Baltimore at the request of a law firm to meet with about 100 women who'd been his patients. I have never been in a room of people who were more devastated by the outcome of secret video. Another example I wanted to mention about harm cameras can do is a little bit more ambiguous as to ethics. There's a New York artist who had a very interesting idea. Someone gave him a telephoto lens for his camera. And the artist decided he would take pictures from his house into the windows of his neighbors. So this artist, New York City artist Arnie Svensson, took beautiful, beautiful photographs of his neighbors, but he peered into their windows. If you've seen the Alfred Hitchcock movie Rear Window, it's exactly that. From his window, the frame of his window, he turned the windows of his neighbors in apartments around him into subjects, one might say objects of interrogation, of scrutiny, of art. And then he created beautiful photographs. When these photographs were put on display, the community was outraged by the fact that they had been turned unwittingly into art. Now, you can be turned unwittingly into pornography. You can be turned unwittingly into art. Is there a difference? How do we understand the difference? In this case, there was a lawsuit that took place, and the neighbors who brought the lawsuits, they lost the lawsuit. They brought an invasion of privacy lawsuit. And you might think, how could they lose? They lost because the judge said, essentially, art and the First Amendment are more important than privacy and the common law. One last example, because it was mentioned earlier that one of the things we can do with documentary film, with video, is to change the way we teach, is to inform the way we teach, inform our scholarship, and also inform our teaching, also to become advocates. But I just wanted to mention, and this is the last of my examples, mention the way in which I've found video to be profoundly helpful in my teaching, and I credit my colleague Regina Austin, who brought documentary film and the law to Penn Law School, to helping me understand better the ways in which we can use video as advocacy and also as a pedagogical tool. So Trayvon Martin and Ferguson, and I was teaching a philosophy class last week, and I wanted to teach the topic of, is there some kind of moral obligation to obey the law? Is there sometimes an obligation to disobey the law, to create disobedience? And I thought I would use as my text some old and some new. So I talked about Socrates and the Crito and his refusal to escape from jail when his friends gave him a way out. I talked about Martin Luther King being in jail in Birmingham and his critique of Birmingham and why he thought he should be in jail and be respected for having gone to jail for breaking the law. I talked about, in something like Cornel West, about the paradoxes of the African American rebellion in the 1960s. And finally, I assigned Henry David Thoreau on civil disobedience, because he also went to jail. Philosophers go to jail. We go to jail. You know, Socrates went to jail, Thoreau went to jail, Angela Davis went to jail. But the thing I want to mention is that Angela Davis went to jail. And so there are these wonderful videos available on YouTube and elsewhere that are excerpts from a documentary filmmaker's work. He went into the jail where Angela Davis was imprisoned after she was arrested for being implicated in the deaths of 4 people who were killed in a Marin County jail back in 1972. And this is, I guess, a day for people with Swedish-sounding names, but I'm going to mispronounce it. But a man named Bo Hallstrom went to the San Rafael County prison and interviewed her, and he asked her about why she seemed to advocate violence, because she had been the person who purchased the guns that had been used by the 17-year-old John Jackson, no relation, in that courthouse to commit those killings. And she beautifully explains, you know, why African American people in the 1960s, including herself, felt like they had to be armed. She talked about Birmingham. She talked about her family, talked about the bombings, the killings. And it was just a wonderful thing. And had a documentary filmmaker not gone into that prison to give her a platform to speak, the public would not have understood her relationship to violence and to gun ownership. And had that film not been available today, I would not have been able to illuminate for my students the source, the context in which these questions of legal obedience arose. So I just want to applaud others who are integrating video into their teaching, who are themselves videographers, who are using their videos for advocacy or for research, and to underscore, though, the need for ethical perspective and guidance and thinking. We must make sure that we ourselves and our students do not turn our subjects into objects of unethical and immoral treatment. But I'm very pleased that this is going on, and I really congratulate you on pushing forward in this new area of research and scholarship. Thank you.
Work from here, right? We have you mic'd here, and then after everyone's gone through their turns, we'll mic you up. So let me tell everybody that. So, good morning.
I'll just drag it over.
Just drag it over.
Let's
Plug
do
it in, drag it over. You just have to negotiate the slots. There's one.
Well, not really.
Your PowerPoint's right up.
Okay.
Can I,
Sure.
it's really, maybe this one. Or I can,
That's actually a power
or
thing.
can I just pull out the power?
You can pull out the
Pull out
power,
something
but
to slip it.
This is going to be the slot.
Yeah, maybe just pull out one for a second without killing something else. Okay, thank you. Alrighty, appreciate it.
And we can just kill, let me
Kill
just
that,
kill that for
yeah.
you. I'll minimize this, and I'll,
Okay.
that's roots. And then Yeah, there's
Go to
yours.
the finder? Yeah? Okay,
There we
thanks so
go.
much.
Sorry, yeah.
So should we actually sit down?
Great. And you have your hard drive up here? Beautiful, okay, great. So, you're gonna go first.
She's gonna go first.
And then you're gonna go second, so, yeah.
You'll go second, Patrick will go third, and we'll go first.
Who's going first?
You're first.
What?
You're on, well, because you're set up.
No, okay. If you need me to, I will. I didn't plan. I was like,
Great.
oh,
And so,
I was gonna.
No, you're going
You, this is hilarious.
so Regina, as soon as you're ready for me to mic everyone up and have the conversation in the roundtable, just give me the thumbs up. I'll get everybody mic'd up. I'm gonna be up there. Yeah. Have fun. Okay. Yeah, I'm watching. I can be down in one.
All right. So
That's
you're gonna go first.
hilarious because I was gonna be like.
No. This way you have to get this out of the way.
So what-
Okay, we're going to get started. Of course, we're having qualms about going first. All these seasoned academics, right? My name is Regina Austin. I teach at the law school. I run the documentaries and the law program at the law school. Our panelists are wonderful. If you go to the website, you can see more information, more biographical information. I don't want to spend too much time going through that at this point. So I urge you, particularly those who always come equipped with a pad or a tablet, to look at all of the information. I'm going to introduce all of the panelists at this point. I'm simply telling you where they're teaching, a little bit about their work. And then we're going to go into the presentations, and you can see for yourself how wonderful they are. The first speaker will be Deborah Spitlnik Vidali, who's an associate professor in the Department of Anthropology at Emory University and the founding director of Regeneration Initiative. In addition, she is a core faculty member of the program in linguistics and an associated faculty member of the Department of Film and Media Studies at Emory University. Her work centers on critical epistemology, ethnographic theater, experimental ethnography, political subjectivity, democracy, citizenship, public sphere theory, discourse circulation, and media ethnography. Okay. No, that's all right. I could go on, right? So that's important. Our second speaker is Jesse Weaver Shipley, who is also an ethnographer and filmmaker. He is Associate Professor of Anthropology at Haverford College. His scholarly work focuses on the interrelationship between urban life, sovereignty, aesthetics, and technology in Ghana and recent African diasporas. He is author of the book, Living the Hip Life, Celebrity and Entrepreneurship in Ghanaian Popular Music, and his film work includes Living the Hip Life, Musical Life in the Streets of Accra, as well as Black Star, Is It Sweet? Tales of an African Superstar in New York, right? His next book is Trickster Theater, The Poetics of Freedom in Urban Africa, which will be out, or is out? About to be out this year. Our third speaker is E. Patrick Johnson, who performed beautifully yesterday. He is the Carlos Montezuma Professor of Performance Studies and African American Studies at Northwestern University. He is the author of Appropriating Blackness, Performance and the Politics of Authenticity, and Sweet Tea, which we heard a lot about yesterday, Black Gay Men in the South, and Oral History. And our final speaker is Ruth Behar, who is the Victor Chaim Pereira Collegiate Professor of Anthropology at the University of Michigan. A writer, a cultural anthropologist, and a modern nomad, she has lived and worked in Spain, Mexico, and Cuba. She is known for her humanistic approach to understanding identity, immigration, and the search for home in our global era. According to her site on Women Make Movies, which is one of my favorite sites, the reviewers say her writings tug at the heart and reveal an artistry that allows her to capture and share intimate stories while preserving their teller's dignity. Her books include Translated Woman, Crossing the Border with Esperanza's Story, which was a New York Times notable book of the year. Okay, so, are you ready? No, but she's going first.
Thank you very much. It's a real pleasure to be here, and a big surprise to be first. I was just going by the letter of the law. You know, the program had me kind of at the end of this panel, and lo and behold, I'm loading my PowerPoint, and I was so busy over here that they conspired while I was standing here. Said, it's okay, she looks like she's ready. So here I am. And I guess I'm ready, and I don't have much of a choice. I am going to be using PowerPoint quite a bit, so I'm wondering if y'all from the South, might just, could go down over there. Should we move the table too, audience people? Maybe we could do the table as a kind of diagonal. Would that be nice? Okay, thanks.
We can raise
Sorry,
the image.
this
Yeah.
is,
Could we raise
yeah.
the image up so we get a full image? Could we raise? Yeah. Right. Yeah, it is. We could either move the table or pick up the rear projector by 2 inches to bring the image up. We can't do that? It's fixed? Okay, so
sorry, didn't heads up. Are the rest of you using PowerPoints too? So, yes. Sure, yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Let's start this again. Ready. Good morning, good morning, good morning. So what does it feel like when we listen to Keisha? And just take a breath. Feel that what's in the brain going down to the feet. The grounding. And what ground are we on? This beautiful floor here, and this beautiful land, Lenape. Thank you. What does it feel like when we just don't start with the speeches? And we do. We start with the speeches, we start with the technology, we comport ourselves to each other, but what does it feel like now when we expand out to a bigger place, what's brought us here? And what does it feel like to even begin to just feel gratitude? So, a word of thanks, when you feel gratitude, I don't know, I'm just going to let you think about what that feeling is and what word might be associated with the feeling. And I'll count to 3. And then I'm going to invite you all to just shout it. So we hear our voices in this room, and we hear that feeling of gratitude, or silence is okay, gesture, whatever. Maybe some want to stand. Could we do this? So something that you're going to stand up, shout, do, or just be quiet, some action on the count of 3, connected to that brain going down to the feet, to the earth, to the thanks of Lenape to be here now, and gratitude. 1, 2, 3. Whatever you'd like. Yeah, let's do it again. Let's do it again. Stand up, gesture, embody something that's gratitude. It may be a word, it may not be. Okay, so get warmed up here. Yeah, no rules. Just on 3. 1, 2, 3. Yes! All right, guys, let's get started. This is the work that I'm doing, thinking about who we are, who we want to be. What conversations are we having? What conversations do we need to have? The bigger title for all of this is the Regeneration Initiative, and I'll talk about that. I've been doing this work for about 6 years, since 2009. And I started to play around with some of the terms that Deb gave us, ethnography and theater, ethnography and performance, where are the boundaries, et cetera. And I started to think about, okay, should I have one of these typical conference titles with the title, subtitle that indicates my thesis, theme, topic? Or what would it be like to have a list of words, the words that I'm moving towards? And I went for the latter and entitled this very short presentation, Regeneration, Ethnography and Theater, Permeability, Process, Play, Joy, Earth Shift, and Knowledge. This is what we're talking about here. This is the work that we do. These are the ways in which we're not just answering key terms. What do key terms mean? What's the limit of ethnography? How does it intersect theater? Who polices the boundaries? Not just those questions, but to think about how we can actually reframe the questions in ways that are not just about bending the form and possibilities of ethnographic research and representation, but reframing the questions in ways in which we're actually asking the questions that we need to be asking. So for me, I'm not going to speak for all of us, but for me, the questions I think we need to be asking are, what's the best use of our time, energy, gifts, creativity, and joy? What can we do now to contribute to the conversation as documentarians and analysts of the human condition? And not to sound trite, or use a cliche, but if we sat and thought, what is the fierce urgency of now, right now, given all the gifts that we have and things that we can do with our time and energy, each one of us might have a different answer to that reframe. So the question for me today is not, it is and it isn't, can we define ethnography? Can we define the intersection of art and social science? I do that, and I need to do that as a translator, as you also offered in your opening remarks. A lot of the work that we do is about translation within the academy, translation for our students, et cetera. And I do operate with the sort of standard questions of, to to wrangle or not to wrangle. That is the question, over definitions, boundaries, and so on. But I also wrangle and sometimes take a break from wrangling over relevance, impact, and meaning. So for me, these are really the questions, the question about reframe. And finally, as our two short presenters this morning asked us to think about this, it's all about imagining and enacting the university of the 21st century. So for me, those issues are about collaboration, not just virtuoso, single-authored genius productions that then get all the recognition, but how do we actually have multiple forms of ownership in the products that we produce and find ways to value those. So I hope we talk about that this afternoon. Also, as far as imagining and enacting the university of the 21st century, we want to think about hybrid models of knowledge production and communication, multi-platform, cross-discipline, and cross-campus work, and ways to mentor. So for me, all of these have been very kind of difficult and problematic. I've taken a lot of risks as I've moved forward with collaboration, with bringing research into spaces of mentoring. And output looks a lot different. In some ways, output and final product for me has not been as important as process. So in this reframe, I also hope that we can talk about valuing not just product, but valuing process. How do we value it? How do we validate it for the institutions and for the political economy of the academic marketplace? We might need to brand these processes or label them or package them or somehow develop evaluative standards. But the linguist in me also wonders, are there ways to even reframe that conversation? So I'll put these things on the table. These are some of the things that I grapple with as I do work with the Regeneration Initiative, which I created about 3.5 years ago on the heels of my own academic work in theater and ethnography. So just to give you a snapshot of some of the projects that have happened over the last 5 years under the Regeneration Initiative, we've got this tree growing with dialogue bubbles that say, connection, dialogue, well-being, us. So it is branded in some way with a logo. It's sort of embarrassing, but anyway, what is it? It's also a very long-winded thing that's not such a neat soundbite. It's a hybrid social science performance public scholarship initiative. What have we done? We've done projects. I've done a lot of projects at Emory. I've also done some at UCLA and Malmö, Sweden. And this is a partial list. And I'll give you some examples of some of these projects so you get a taste of how ethnography and theater merge. 2 minutes. Okay, I have time for 15. Does this change the format? Okay. I've got a clock that says 5 here, and so would it be okay if I do the 15? Because I want to show clips and things. Okay, all right. So these are some of the projects that, that I've done with the Regeneration Initiative. And for me, again, you know, it's about bending the form and possibilities of ethnographic research and representation, and it's also about using ethnographic theater for positive social change. So using the double meaning of regeneration as about generation, but also renewal, I move forward with a lot of projects that could be classified as applied theater or theater for social change. So what is ethnography and who adjudicates? This is one of the questions that I think is really interesting and important for us to think about. And you know, we have the kind of standard received definition of ethnography. This is why I didn't want to go first. I was thinking Ruth would tell us all of this, you know. Like, this is something I could just say what she said. is ethnography in the etymological sense is the word that was first used in the 5th century BC by Herodotus as he traveled around and wrote about various peoples. It's simply ethnos graphine, a folk or a people, the writing of. So writing about a people or a culture. We know that ethnography is much more than that. Ethnography is a noun, it's a thing, it's a practice, it's a process, it's a product, and we also use the adjective ethnographic to talk about qualities of things. So things might be ethnographic in quality without necessarily being an ethnography front and center in the sense of the thinginess of ethnography. For me, I like to use a 3-part definition of ethnography, breaking it down, to methods, the lens, and the product. There's a lot of overlaps across these 3. Obviously, the best ethnographic methods are using an ethnographic lens, but it's a useful heuristic to think about the 3 moments, let's say, of an ethnographic project. An ethnographic project is grounded in various qualitative social science research methods that are open-ended, multi-layered. There are interviews, participant observation, and so on, with the goal of trying to document and understand human realities and lived experience. The lens itself is a way of looking for implicit and explicit patterns and connecting fibers or connective tissue throughout lived experience. And finally, the ethnographic product is this form of an output of a written or cinematic or performed or media-based or multisensorial product that represents, should we say, the findings of the methods and the lens. There's a tremendous fluidity across these 3, and I'd like to say that some of the projects that I've engaged in are very much operating with an ethnographic lens, but not necessarily premised upon an ethnographic method in that conventional sense. So there's a tremendous amount of blurriness and fluidity across the projects. Some look a lot like E. Patrick's work, where there's a full-length investigation with the field methods to get close to people's worlds and understand them through their own terms, and then through various kinds of sifting through the data, one understands patterns, one creates juxtapositions across stories, and then a product relays that. Other projects are much more auto-ethnographic. So I'll get to a few examples to show you that. And before I do that, I do want to just throw up this slide again, which would have been like the what E. Patrick or what Ruth said slide. But we know that there are tremendous fluidity across these sort of professionally recognized categories or disciplinarily policed categories of production. They have different relations to truth and representation in some cases, but ultimately what really is going on is a kind of process of turf wars, policing, funding, and credentialing, as well as project contextualization for audiences that some often forces us to just choose a word to describe what we do so that people can move on, or that the funders can understand, or we operate as translators. Ethnography cross-sects all of those, and we can see that in this tremendous proliferation of terms and labels at the intersection of ethnography and theater. Saldana presents something like 80 different terms for these siblings or distant cousins. Ethnotainment, ethno-storytelling, docudrama, theater of fact, verbatim theater, tribunal play, word-for-word theater. You used the story circle theater in your E. Patrick. You had Readers Theater, thank you. Ethnographic drama, auto-ethnography, theater, et cetera, et cetera. So what is this? In Filewood's terms, it's a rhizomatic archive of procedures and perceptions rather than a genealogy of forms. And we find people at the intersection of theater and ethnography using more than one term. And again, the question for me is, what is the value added of getting the right label, to getting the right boundary? In a lot of cases, we see that the practitioners who've engaged in this kind of work also are boundary crossers in much the same ways that people cross boundaries from linguistics to anthropology and vice versa right here at UPenn. So I find this interesting to think about the intellectual history of interdisciplinarity and the policing of boundaries and the credentialing sort of all swirling in our midst. And at the same time, I just say, you know, I'm really not going to wrangle over those. I'm just going to do work that I love to do. So here are 3 projects I'm going to talk about briefly. I'll show you a few clips. The first has been based on long-term research, the second on a short-term residency, and the third embedded in a semester course. The first was about issues of democracy and civic engagement and young people's relations to media, and I started that work in 2006 and created a verbatim play based on interviews with over 90 people and taking the raw words of individuals and then putting them into the form of characters, both single individuals and amalgams. So that, you would say, is a real ethnographic project with ethnographic interviews and participant observation put into a full-length play that's been produced several times. The short-term residency took the theme of racism, sexism, and multicultural identities because that's what the 23 MA students and 3 on Skype wanted to do when we worked in Sweden. And through that, we used various methods of ensemble buzz, improv, movement song, journaling, interview, and real-life sketches. You can't really do ethnographic research with a 3-day residency. So what do? You do a lot of buzzing in the room, you get a project up on its feet, you play with it, and you just see where it goes. We're going to do some of that in the interlude this morning. And the third one, which I'm doing again, a version of this semester, is a project that I like to create within a semester course. And in this one, the students all focused on time, did research on time. What is time? How is time experienced in both positive and not so harmonious ways in people's lives? And they did ethnographic interviews, a lot of participant observations. So with this project, again, collaboration and how research enters into the classroom become very interesting and exciting frameworks for me as I guide young people to do participant observation and research and then come up with a giant corpus of field work and try to render that into a theatrical work. So these are the labels that then I've used to talk about those 3 projects. The first is primarily verbatim theater and ethnographic theater, the third generative theater and autoethnographic theater, and the fourth verbatim theater, ethnographic theater. And it gets to be really messy when you try to figure out which label and who cares. But let me show you a couple of clips. So from the first one, the regeneration project, I want to show you how an interview transcript got turned into a segment of performance. And if I just click on it'll go to the website, right? We're on YouTube here. I've got these pieces on YouTube. And we're going to listen to Shockwave's speech. So this is not a professional actor, an alumni of Emory University.
You have an effect.
He came home in a hearse. This girl that I remember from seeing her in homecoming court, from going to the same club meetings, from seeing her at prom, this girl, Kristen, has to raise her baby alone. All because John was shot in the head. All because Obama didn't bring him home first.
But here's the point, man. You have an effect on the world. You can change it or not change it. But that in turn gives you an even bigger responsibility knowing the difference between the yin and yang of things. The right and the wrong. The media don't help you figure that out, man. So what do? Where do I fit into the grand scheme of things? fit into it as a guy, selling a CD every single day to make my living as an alternative choice after I go work for somebody else. Earning a shit ton of money and having to spend it all, being in debt up to my ears, making investments, losing investments. You know the story. It's a fairy tale gone bad, man. And you know what? The American dream? The American dream, really? The American dream is one of those things that is supposed to be what you make of it. It's not supposed to have so many catch-22s, clauses, and red tape. It's supposed to be being able to be a little kid with a lemonade stand. And you know what? Watch the news right now. Even little lemonade stands are getting robbed now. Come on! I mean, it's supposed to be being able to sell a lemonade drink from a lemonade stand and just be able to make a couple bucks off it and just be happy with that. Or be comfortable with a quote-unquote food, clothing, and shelter. Life.
So that gives you an example of a segment of the play where issues of the American dream are being engaged. I want to get back to the PowerPoint here, and let's see if I can. I see Ruth Bahar's PowerPoint, and I can't. Okay, great. The second clip that I want to show you is from this project, the short residency project that we did in Sweden, The World I Want to Live In. And this one gives you a very different feel for how ethnography, theater, and generative buzzwork are all brought into one space using song, dance, and spoken word.
Where success is based on the lives you touch rather than the...
I imagine a world where my voice as an individual actually matters.
Where we can communicate.
Where there's peace.
Where the notion of me can be the very same idea as you, even if you happen to be from over there. Where I can wake up in another setting in a country without a name. Who needs them anyway?
Where people care about environment. Where there is harmony.
I want my kids to grow up in a world that embraces diversity, where change is a good thing, where success is based on the lives you touch rather than the things you have, where hard work pays off. I want my children to grow up in a world where the focus is on what you give, not what you receive.
So I want my children to grow up in a world where the focus is on what you give, not on what you receive. Now that piece raises the question of what happens when we don't have a polished work. You know, we incubate something, we have an ethnographic lens, we have autoethnography, and a lot of interesting, edgy work in just a 3-day period. But not professional, not polished. It's not a neat product. It doesn't go anywhere. It's just a single kind of moment of experience. And finally, the last example of the intersection of ethnography and theater might be the most recognizable one for those of us who know and do conventionally understood forms of field work and documentation. And this one is where we actually hear the ethnographer's voice. So I'll offer this clip from the third project, which is the Slices of Time project. Trying to get the technical here. Okay, here we go.
Being interrupted because I have to move my chair for someone to get by, or from some girl telling her life story to her friends. If you are a college student who happens to have homework, papers, or exams to prepare for, I'd advise you not to go to Starbucks. It's a complete waste of your time, and the line is always long anyways.
Time? It's hard to say. I don't understand how to look for time. At time? I don't know what I'm looking at. What constitutes time? How do people manifest such a notion? Is it all watches and calendars and Sapir Whorf? Linguistic metaphors like time is money. Those don't seem to be what I'm looking for. It seems too dry, too technical. What counts? I don't understand, and 2 hours at Starbucks didn't help. I'm interested in religion, and gender, and performance, and prejudice, and media, and politics, but time? Where does time come in? How do I observe time? Is it a piece or just the frame?
Here's what I observed about the line people and their relation to time. The line people...
So for the sake of time, I have to stop that clip, but let me just get to a concluding point and hand it over to the rest of the panel. Just having a little tech problem here to find where that PowerPoint is again. Is it? I can't seem to get the doc to show me where PowerPoint is. Okay. Then I go down to the bottom, it doesn't come up. Thank you. Okay, great. Okay, thanks. So finally, in closing, I hope that these short examples and these the definitional dancing that I've done here today gives you a sense of what we can think about as the intersection of ethnography and theater. And for me, the real question is to continue to invite the process of exercising the domestic in Bourdieu's terms, to unpack and purge those elements of academic culture that impede the human spirit, to try to push the boundaries of disciplinary expectations of ethnographic closure, individual ownership, muted politics, and the downplaying of the artistic. What happens when all of those are exercised and released and challenged? It's my hope that we find language to frame such pursuits not just as a question of either social science or art, but as fundamentally both, and also beyond. It would be a language of inclusion and addition rather than exclusion and subtraction. And it would still be a language of anthropology. Thank you.
Yeah, maybe we can close the blinds. I'm actually going to I'm going to talk for a bit. I'm going to show 2 video clips. First, I want to thank Deborah, and I don't know if, she wrote this brilliant article which sort of shaped some of the work that I did when I was in graduate school. So it's really a pleasure to kind of present stuff after her her work was about, at that point, social circulation, discourse analysis, and radio in East Africa. And the way that she talked about, for me, what turned into thinking about genre, and maybe this is kind of an evolution of your work from that, really kind of shaped some of the stuff that I want to talk a little bit about today. I'm going to show some video. I'm going to show two different pieces from this new project because I've been thinking a lot about the relationship between sound and image as a sort of form of engagement and sound and image film as form of representation, which to me is one of the kind of contradictions at the root of something called visual anthropology or visual studies. How do we use these things? And I think Deb said it really well yesterday. How do we think about things as engagements with forms of freedom, and what do we mean by freedom? But let me just mention 3 things about projects that I've done. And I actually didn't think about this until thinking about this conference. I have sort of, my first book project, Living the Hip Life, was about hip-hop music, social circulation, media, commodification around hip-hop in West Africa. I made a film that accompanied, or actually preceded the book, and in some ways it was a more typical documentary product. My second book, which is about to come out in about a month, is on Pan-African theater in West Africa. And for that project, I did a lot of work on and around theater. I directed theater productions with the National Theater Company in Ghana, and had various kinds of engagements around theater that turned into a book which in some ways bifurcated the visual from the written a little bit more. My third book project is actually on political sovereignty, and the art products around it are actually more bifurcated and more kind of illegible to anthropology than the earlier work. I did a video exhibition called Investigated, which focuses on issues of information circulation, which linked research in the book on colonial incarceration of African chiefs and leaders to what's happening with Julian Assange right now, to Edward Snowden. So looking historically colonial ideas of information circulation to contemporary notions of information circulation and security. But one thing I started to think about when I was preparing for this conference was that in fact my work has shifted to splitting what's visual and what's artistic more from what's written and what's formalized as scholarly work. And I'm not sure that that's a good or bad thing. To me, it's partly about writing about genre as well as thinking about where our work becomes legible and illegible, what kind of conversations we're a part of. So if you're making films for an experimental film crowd, you're speaking differently, you're framing it differently. It may look the same. Or if you're making films that are going to be displayed as a triptych in a gallery, that's different than if you're cutting something that's going to be circulated at film festivals. There's a kind of practical circulation of these things. So I wanted to show a few pieces from this really sort of fresh project that I've been working on. And then I want to talk about them a bit. And let me just frame them as different kinds of pieces first. The project is on female boxing in New York, and it's focusing on a number of different women around New York City who have different stories and different lives. We're using film as a way to kind of engage. The films are kind of field notes. The films are also used by the women. They're the ones who are encouraging. They're excited for the film. They want to set up YouTube channels. They're interested in kind of publicizing their work more. Part of the project is about the relationship of gender and power and violence, and particularly class, in sort of the circulation of bodies in New York City. Let me just show these clips, and then I'm going to expand a little bit on the talk. So the first one, let me see, make sure they... Did you show up, Mr. Hard Drive? Let's see, where are you? There you are. All right. The first one is intercut footage from Gleason's gym, and the two boxers are Melissa and Ronica, and it's intercut with an interview I did with them. And as I said, this is very raw. I wanted to show you, the film is quite beautiful in places, but it's very raw because I kind of wanted to show you some of the rough edges for those of you who are interested in film and those of you who don't know much about film if you're interested in talking about the process. How do sound and image work together? And Keisha and E. Patrick both brought us brilliantly through the kinds of relationship of embodiment to forms of knowledge. And as someone making film and thinking about how to convey ideas of bodily experience, how to convey the complicated relationship between the politics and structures and institutions that hold people in place, and then the possible potential moments of liberation politics, or I think as Deb was pointing out, and E. Patrick was pointing out, where the kind of instantaneous moments of expression or possibility or potential in some kind of experience of time. How do people think about who they are and what access they have to themselves? So various versions of sovereignty. But I wanted to think about that through film, so you experience it as part of the process of people going through things. So anyone who's ever done a sport or trained for any kind of artistic form of practice or something knows that one of the key things about learning a sport or learning any form of embodiment is repetition. And this is something I've always struggled with in terms of film. How do you talk about the experience of time when it sometimes takes a long time to think about the process that people are doing? So documentary film, in my experience, can be quite boring for the opposite reason, because it tells you the end. It tells you the thesis, it tells you what you're supposed to know. It gives you an issue. So if you're watching PBS, you're like, oh, I just learned something. Oh, I just came away with that, with a sound chunk, a piece of information. Rather, I kind of want to frustrate the viewer a little bit. I want to challenge them a little bit to think about what they're learning, to experience what the people in the images and sound bites are going through. Sometimes things are illegible, sometimes things are a little bit difficult. So this is Ronica and Melissa. No, I'm not going to show the whole thing. Sound? Is there sound?
My name is Melissa St. Ville. I was born in Long Island, New York, and I live in Haiti, and I live in Brooklyn, and I am 31 years old. I was born September 8th at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, 1983, and I am a professional fighter. I got into boxing because my mom and dad used to whoop my ass, but, you know, I get paid for fighting now, so I feel good, and I really, really love boxing, and I used to run track, and Ronica is my best friend.
My name is Ronica Jeffrey. I am 32 years old. I started boxing really late, probably like at the age of 20, 21. I've won 3 Golden Gloves, 1 in the amateur. I was also on the female national team. It was pretty sudden, something that happened like really quick out of nowhere. Boxing is my life. I don't even know what to do without it right now, you know. Turned professional in 2008. My record now is 13-1-0, and I have a really good team.
Oh, I forgot to put, I am the WIBA at 130, and I am the IWBF at 147.
Yes.
And I am 6'13".
Yes. Finally, she knows her record.
When I first met Ronica Jeffrey, she rolled her eyes at me. And I didn't even understand, like, why she do that? Because I started watching the Amazon. I'm like, yo, that girl could fight. Yo, she could fight. And so one day, you know, I was, you know, all over the world, unstable, and she finally, you know, told me, you know, we finally talked, and she said that I have to settle down. You know, if I want to, you know, make it into boxing, I got to stay in one place, in one gym. And she hooked me up with her manager. You know, just told me to just stay focused and stop moving around and, you know, get far in boxing. I listened to her, and I became world champion, and I'm still here.
And I don't know why she keeps telling people this story that I used to roll my eyes at her, because I don't remember that. She keeps saying that.
You just said, can you?
No.
Can you?
I did not. Maybe it wasn't her I was rolling my eyes, and maybe it was her voice, because it probably came out of nowhere, and I probably was like, what is that?
But yeah, I went to the boxing gym, and because I didn't feel like being in the house, and my cousin was at home, and I was trying to be like that nosy cousin, like, where you at? Where you going? I tracked him down because I'm a stalker.
It's all of that. It's, you know what I'm saying, we, you know, like, we're really like a team. Like, you know, as I said, like, we're really, really close. That's my best friend and stuff like that. So it's definitely it's definitely a good. It's, you know what I'm saying. When it all boils down to it, it's a good thing. You know, it's so funny because we be on Facebook or whatever, and people be like, y'all are so funny, like, because the dynamics of our relationship is so weird that it's because she's like bazonkers, like all over the place and like hyper, and I'm like, calm the fuck down. You know what I'm saying? Like, chill out, calm down. You know, like if I turn my face, she's like swinging from a chandelier. You know what I'm saying? And I have to swap her down, like, like things like that.
All right, so that's one clip. I want to contrast that with, so this is a clip that has an interview that's with the two of them, and there's a couple people in the room, and they're just talking about who they are and what they do. Contrast with them sparring. So it's a way to think about sort of a set of contrasts, right? So how they talk about intimacy and friendship, contrast with them very highly technical sparring, so not trying to hurt each other, but catching punches and stuff, but this kind of intense, very visceral experience. So looking at the contrast between those two and thinking about how an audience reacts to it. Let me contrast that with another clip of them as well from the same sparring session, but this is one, I won't play the whole take, but it's one shot, which is a 7-minute shot, sort of following them. So the sound is natural sync sound, and it's a different way to experience the same kind of sense of them. Let's see.
That's a body shot. An uppercut is to the
I was coming to the chin.
But I thought about this when you showed me here. What? Look. This one.
That's a body shot.
But I thought I used to go like that. Y'all showed me this one. Yeah, but that's a body shot that goes like this. But we tell you go boom, boom. That's what we say. Go up to the middle, go to the chin. You just that's fine. But you gotta, that's where the uppercut is. And when you're on the inside and you're standing like this, you gotta bring it out, and you can just to the chin. Okay, come on, let's go back in there. I did this shit. I did this shit before I retired. I gotta get one uppercut before I retire. Cause it don't make no damn sense. I've been in this game for about 14, 15 years. I don't know how that. I was 17 when I started. I'm 31 now. I ain't throwing uppercut yet. But that's that bullshit. But I'ma get that shit before I retire. I'ma get it. I'ma get it. Would you like my second? No. Why not? Cause you sound like you're cracking glass. Oh.
She fight more with her legs now. You know how she used to be. She moves a lot now. You punch her, she going.
All right, so I cheated a little bit. That last shot isn't the same clip. 4, cool. But it's a 7-minute shot, just watching them kind of spar, come out of the ring. To me, they're interesting to contrast as sort of forms of engagement. I've known, this is Leon, the Cat Taylor, who's a former pro fighter, who's their coach. I've known these guys for, 8 years. And the idea of doing a film with them actually came from some of the fighters. So then I started shooting. So it's kind of a behind-the-scenes kind of experience. But this is as a kind of shot I wanted to show you because it gives a sense of the way that a kind of verite or experience of the camera is meant to show you a certain intimacy without telling you about it or in an overdetermined kind of way. You see the way that they're caring for each other. You see the way they're joking. Melissa's got this really high-pitched voice that they're always making fun of, but she's this kind of outgoing, incredible kind of like goofy personality. And contrast for people who don't know things about boxing, they're like trying to hit they're trying to hit each other in the head. So there's a kind of interesting set of contrasts that the sort of slow take is meant to show. And to show this sense of temporality. What does it mean to be a fighter? It means doing the same thing over and over and over and over and over and over again for years, to think about how you embody something. Ronica is one of the sort of most technical fighters in the world. And both of those women are world champions. And she's one of the most brilliant kind of technical fighters. And later on, she talks a lot about how, she's trying things out in sparring. She's trying something so that when she's actually fighting, she doesn't have to think about it. It has to be naturalized. So in some ways, the film is about how do you think about the body? How do you naturalize certain kinds of activities? There's also a lot of work that they do to think about particularly race and gender. So what does it mean to be a female fighter? There's another clip with the heavyweight female world championship where she talks about, the champion talks about, she took Friday off from work. Saturday, she flew down to the, I think it's in St. Kitts, won the world championship in 10 rounds, was back at work on Monday with her championship belt. What does she do? She's a New York City middle school teacher. She won $3,000 for winning the world championship as a female heavyweight fighter, and she's back in the classroom. She said how excited her kids were that she'd won this world championship. Right, so the economics and politics of that. Also then the sort of politics of race, where there's 1 or 2 white female fighters who get a lot of attention, whereas the black women, Latina women don't get as much attention and are very explicit about that, right? So they're saying, well, it's nothing to take away from the white fighters, but they're getting attention because they're going to sell tickets, right? So thinking about these kinds of issues that come up in sort of daily enactment of life in a boxing gym, the kind of intimacy, the kind of kinship networks, the sort of extended generational support network that the gym provides. So to conclude, I wanted to show these to think about how video becomes, or how kind of any kind of technological media becomes a form of engagement to kind of show the process of what's happening in a particular place, and also as a researcher then to kind of allow me to engage with something and then take it away and think about it in another context. And then, so tomorrow, we're going to go sit down and look at this footage together, see what they want to put online. We're probably going to shoot some more stuff. And then to think about what this then turns into. So for them, they want to promote themselves as fighters, right? They're getting no attention. They're some of the best athletes that you'll see, and yet no one even knows that they're there. She works full-time, Midtown Manhattan. Leon sort of tries to eke out a living as training a lot of women fighters. So the stories are really what's interesting. And as I said, for me as a kind of someone who's done ethnography film, art film, that kind of thing, to try and think about these different forms is actually becoming sort of more bifurcated for me as an artistic practitioner. I mean, what E. Patrick is doing is brilliant. Sort of, I think we got this incredible sort of multimodal presentation, the best of all the different forms. And I feel like my kinds of practices have become more separate. And to me, that points to my final point, which has to do with the cultural and contextual social historical specificity of notions of performativity. So one of the things I try and do in this new book that's coming out is think about what are the particularities of storytelling, for example, in Ghana, What are the particular performative enactments? Because I think there's a lot of times linguistic anthropologists and performance theorists assume that performance is a thing or one kind of thing, which then we use in different generic ways. But in fact, I'm interested in the specificities of how people tell stories. What are the contextual ways that signs work differently for different communities of interpretation? So in this recent book, thinking about how Anansi trickster storytelling is taken as the basis of national theater in Ghana, and I start with that book with the question I'm ending with. What does it mean when the national citizen in Ghana is also a trickster? And how do we think about the trickster as a kind of storyteller? What does it mean to tell stories from a particular vantage point? And for the trickster, storytelling is both a way of enacting a kind of world, but it's also subverting that world at the same time. So to think more and more about the process of storytelling as having contextual specificity, and sometimes, and this is where it sort of lands a little bit, sometimes that moment of uncertainty or that moment of possibility, like you see fighters, like they're happy, they're excited to, like, you know, Melissa's really happy, like they just sparring, she's trying to learn an uppercut, and she's kind of hard to understand, the audio's not great, but she's like, I've been fighting for 14 years and I've never thrown an uppercut. I'm gonna throw an uppercut before I retire. And Ronica's making fun of her. She's like, no, that's a body shot. You wanna throw this. And then they're just very excited about this kind of particular nuanced discussion of various kinds of things and the sort of potentials of that. 0. But this is exactly the point. So the structural constraints are the ways in which those moments of freedom conclude. So thank you very much. Amen.
I think I'll help us catch up on time because I'm going to be very brief, because a number of the concerns of this panel I actually discussed yesterday. And I actually want to take a different tact and talk about some of the, first of all, good morning. I would say happy spring, but not so much. I want to take a different tact to the panel and talk about some of the impediments to visual and performative ethnography based on my experience in doing Sweet Tea, but also my new project, Honeypot, on Black lesbians of the South, but also other stories that I've heard from colleagues around the world. The first is institutional impediments to doing this kind of work. And the one subset of that is disciplinary impediments in terms of traditional scholars not appreciating moving outside of traditional methodologies of doing ethnographic research, whether that be ethnographers in traditional anthropology departments or sociology departments, or whether it be folks who don't do ethnographic research at all and certainly don't understand approaching any kind of research vis-a-vis an aesthetic approach. So those things have implications for the way the work is evaluated, for tenure, for instance, or even the way that students who are doing this kind of work are judged within the classroom, particularly when they take these approaches to courses outside of performance studies or anthropology, where faculty encourages kind of creative exploration. The other institutional impediment is the IRB. I've had horrible experiences with the IRB at Northwestern. For instance, when I went through the IRB process for Sweet Tea, the criteria for what constituted consent was a moving target, but it was still a little bit more elastic than it was for when I went through the process for Honeypot. For instance, for Sweet Tea, the IRB consent form that the Northwestern IRB made me compose allowed for a little more flexibility in terms of what the interlocutors would and would not allow me to do. For instance, You could use your real name, but I just couldn't videotape them. With Honeypot, this new project, IRB said that under no circumstances could any of the participants use their real name, none of them, because they made this distinction. Now, what I'm about to tell you makes no sense, so don't try to make it make sense. They distinguish between different kinds of research for generalizable knowledge, or research for the actual process of doing the interview. So if I were to interview one person, they didn't consider that generalizable knowledge. If I were to interview, and they didn't specify after one, it was considered research. And this is a contradictory point. If I were to, they consider the research the actual interview, but publishing a book based on that research was not research. So if I wanted to use their real names in the book, I could. So don't make it make any sense. So in terms, the implication for creative and visual anthropology and ethnography, I think, is the kinds of medium that you can use to actually conduct the research in the first place, whether that be a video camera, even an audio device, and so on and so forth. The IRB has implications for how we conduct this research. There's also a pedagogical impediment sometimes in doing this work relative to institutions in terms of what we can teach, what our departments value as a legitimate class, in terms of teaching students how to approach any kind of research from a creative perspective. Again, you don't necessarily have that issue at places like Penn or Northwestern or other places, but at other institutions, this would be a problem. The other big impediment sometimes to doing this kind of work are the participants themselves, what they will and will not allow you to do. And also it's about striking a balance between you trying to do the research that you want to do and the participants having some agency on how they're represented. And sometimes those two things are at odds. One of the interesting things with Sweet Tea has been how the participants have been open to me coming back to them and asking for more information or asking them to participate in different kinds of ways. And the suggestion that Deborah made yesterday about them turning the tables on me and having them interview me is also an interesting one, but also gives, turns the power dynamic on its head. But how we negotiate our relationships with our research interlocutors has a real impact on the kinds of work that we can do relative to visual and performative ethnography. The third potential impediment to doing this kind of work is the aesthetic itself. As I said yesterday in my talk, you don't do your participants, you do them a disservice if you create bad performance or if you create a bad film. Well, that runs up against our whole notion of experiments, having our students be experimental and engaging in this work, and sometimes those things are going to be bad. But the larger question is, who does the evaluation of whether it's good or bad? And is that the point? It is the point to the extent that you have to do work that's ethical, even work that's artistic, should be guided by some questions of ethics because you're dealing with people's lives. So it makes a difference, as Jesse just said, as whether you're making this work for other artists, or if you're making it for scholars, or if you're making it for artist scholars. The criteria will change depending on who the audience is. Or are you making it for the participants? So all of those questions are circling around the question of aesthetics. Who does the evaluation? And does it impede you from being more experimental? Because not all of us are brilliant writers and ethnographers like a Ruth Behar. I would love to write like her, but I can't. Not everyone are performers. Not all of us are filmmakers. So how can we engage in a more artistic approach to doing ethnographic research when our expertise falls a little short? And then the final point I want to make is about, what is that final point? The research itself. You know, most of us come to we're in the academy because we're driven by questions, epistemologies. How does sometimes the aesthetic or our drive to be artistic get in the way of the research? For instance, if in my talk yesterday, I talked about how when I started doing the research for Sweet Tea, I wasn't interested in the performance or wasn't even thinking about it. But what if I were, from the very beginning, if I approached that research already thinking in my head how it's going to become a performance? There's a way in which that could get in the way, that could have gotten in the way of doing the research, because it would have influenced the kind of questions I asked the men. It could have influenced our interaction in terms of me pandering or trying to solicit specific kinds of information for them so that it would become this great performance. So there's a way in which how we prioritize our research relative to the aesthetic medium that can impact the very research itself. So those are the sort of questions I want us to think about in terms of doing visual and performative ethnography, because you have to keep all of these things in the air as you're actually doing it. And sometimes we're going to falter, sometimes it's going to be a wonderful success by just happenstance, or a combination of all of those things. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Good morning. Well, I want to begin by thanking Deborah and Gabriel and all the faculty and students involved in making this event possible and making this conversation happen. Yeah.
You're okay?
No, I'm not okay. I don't know how to get it back on.
You keep talking, I'll figure that out.
Okay. So I'm actually going to begin with a little moment of autoethnography. So here I am preparing to talk about the visual in anthropology, and I start seeing flashes of light in the periphery of my vision while driving home. At first, as I drive along, I think the police is following me. I have a deeply punitive, Kafkaesque imagination, a result of my Cuban immigrant background and being taught to fear anyone in a uniform, and especially perfect, thank you, police and immigration officers. But no, it's not the police, so I keep driving slowly, trailed by those streaks of light. I don't like those eye flashes. I want them to go away. They are like lines cutting through the sky. Next day, I find an ophthalmologist, and after an intense exam, probed with every conceivable bright light, eyes dilated to the point of piercing whiteness, I learn it's vitreous detachment, the gel in the eye peeling like old paint, flakes of it coming apart. That's what I'm seeing, that's what the streaks are. My retina appears to be fine for the moment, but I must be checked. As the vitreous keeps pulling, there is a chance it might still want to take the retina along with it and detach it. And if not attended to immediately, blindness could result. I worry about my eyes. The fear of going blind is one of my more terrible fears among my many fears. I came into anthropology via literature and writing, but I've always loved the realm of the visual and remember the excitement of receiving my first camera, a Nikon, at the age of 13,
which I used to take pictures in my neighborhood in Queens, New York, and to also create portraits of members of my family. It was a camera I cherished and eventually passed on to my son, Gabriel, who is a filmmaker and photographer. My love for the realm of the visual extends to loving how words look on the printed page. I love all the different fonts. I adore how pretty and elegant the letters look in Garamond, how fierce and decisive in Arial. And there is such beauty in the arrangement of words on the page, especially in poems where letters and words find a refuge in between blank spaces. Print is gorgeous, but let me be quick to say how much I appreciate e-readers. Words look stunning on an iPad, and I derive great enjoyment from seeing images become supple and dance on a screen. Reading The New Yorker on an iPad is one of the more delightful 21st century experiences. I'm well aware I must get to the point and move into a more academic voice, but the flashes are still there, worrying me, and now the right eye has grown sore, the cornea ulcerated, apparently from the eye exam itself, too much prodding and dilating and too many shining lights. I close it and keep on going, looking at the screen with just my left eye. So with some uncertainty and true vulnerability for a vulnerable observer, I'm going to proceed now and talk about some real anthropology stuff. So here we go. Okay, so I'm going to talk about a few different long-term projects, as much time as I have to do that in, and show you how I've been involved in bringing images into anthropology from the very start. And my first project was in a village in northern Spain. And as a graduate student, I had studied photography with two amazing photographers, Emmett Gowan and Joel Meyerowitz. So I learned about both black and white and color photography, and I used both formats in this small village, Santa Maria del Monte, in northern Spain. I actually used to lug field cameras with me and take pictures, and I was documenting at the time everyday agrarian life. This was in the late 70s, early 80s. And I arrived just after a massive rural exodus had taken place. So there were just a few people left in these small villages in northern Spain. And being born in Cuba and having been raised in New York in a very urban environment, this world seemed extremely exotic and different to me. And so my pictures really, in many ways, reinforced the classical anthropological obsession with worlds on the verge of disappearing, people working the land in traditional ways with cows and so on. And I dreamed of creating a kind of photo essay book in the style of John Berger, whose work I really liked at the time, but it wasn't acceptable among my professors, so instead I wrote a dissertation that then became a book, The Presence of the Past in a Spanish Village, and it had a centerfold of pictures on glossy paper, and that's where some of these pictures appeared. There am I sort of enacting. Okay. So just some points there. So I was trying to chronicle the passing of an age, and in fact, I created a photo exhibit that was called that. And what's so interesting, though, is that I stayed in touch with people in this community over the years. And now in recent years, basically 30 years later, I've been returning to Spain and to this village more frequently. My book was translated into Spanish. And the book, which was never the book that I was most proud of my work, but it's become a treasured narrative for many people in the community, for children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren of those whom I worked with in the late 70s and 80s. And these pictures that I took, about 5,000 of them, have since been scanned, given to the village, and they're now posted on the, here's the book I wrote, and they've now been posted on the website of the village. The village now has a website. There's a young man from the community who's a techie kind of person. He's created this website, and so he's been posting the pictures. And then interestingly enough, there's also now an ethnographic museum in León, and many of the tools that I used to see being used by people 30 years ago are now in museum cases in this ethnographic museum. So I think the role of ethnographic photography can be to chronicle things in time, and sometimes you don't know what's going to be historically important in the future, but just paying attention to what is right in front of you, things that might actually seem uninteresting to those actually living that life can be very useful in the long term. And so the anthropologist, in a sense, presents the gift of time to communities that were generous enough to grant us entrance. So now, switching to Cuba, over the past 20 years, I've been going back and forth to Cuba, moving deeply again into the realm of visual ethnography. Having left as a child, the way I initially learned about my family history was through photographs and documents that my family brought with them to the United States, and it's through these visual materials that I've constructed a vision of my family's diaspora and the construction of identity as they moved from Europe to Cuba to the US in just a couple of generations. So the photographs, these photographs I'll show you here, this is my grandparents, recently arrived from Poland and Russia to Cuba and marrying. My maternal grandfather, who worked on the railroad in Cuba, he was a Russian Jewish immigrant, and fascinatingly, he was one of the workers on the railroad in Cuba, and he was very proud of this document. He always showed it to me, and I was able to inherit it. My grandparents' wedding invitation in Cuba, and it's printed in Spanish and Yiddish. And this was a great uncle who was a street peddler. Many of these immigrants, that's what they did initially. They fanned out all over the island of Cuba, peddling. And here is my maternal grandparents and great-grandparents just recently reunited in Cuba in the 1930s, right on the eve of the Holocaust. So for me, the whole idea of Cuba being a kind of refuge for my Jewish family. My parents marrying both sides of the family. There, me as a little girl with my mother on the iconic Malecón of Havana. And then eventually the departure in the early 60s. It's my grandmother carrying a hat box, apparently, out of Cuba. And so this idea of family photographs and family documents, creating a narrative of a diaspora. And I've used these visual materials many, many times in PowerPoint presentations that I do, not only in academic settings such as this one, but also community settings. So I'm interested even in the modern slideshow as a genre in itself, and how in telling this story I perform my authenticity, I perform my intimate relationship to the ethnography that I do in Cuba. So I've also done ethnographic research in Cuba. That's me as a little girl standing in front of the door of the synagogue in Havana, one of the several synagogues in Havana. We lived half a block away. And initially, when I started returning to Cuba, I tried to stand in the actual places where I had been photographed or where members of my family had been photographed in Cuba, as if by standing in those places and reenacting presence, I could somehow recuperate lost time. And then I began gradually to study the Jewish community in Cuba. It's a very small community of about 1,000 people, a very interesting community, very mixed community. There are only a handful of Jews that are Jewish on the mother's and father's side, so it's a community very much that has taken in people from all over Cuba. And I worked on this project with Havana-based photographer Humberto Mayol, who at the time was only doing still black and white photographs, and he didn't even know there was a Jewish community in Cuba, and I brought him into this project, and we were very interested to find conjunctures of Cuban and Jewish identity. And so this particular picture was intended to show you how Che Guevara almost appears to be in the synagogue himself with these Jews who are in procession. And so in many of the pictures, we created this kind of intertextuality where people would show us pictures of the past, particularly of their Jewish past and their connection to it, and then we would take a picture of the contemporary person sharing this photographic documentation. And this woman is showing a picture of the last quinceañera, the last 15th birthday party held in Cuba in 1959. All these young women had just turned 15, and that's her. And then the story that goes with this is she says, well, of all those women, I'm the only one left in Cuba, because there was a massive migration out of Cuba at the beginning of the revolution. So she's the only one left in this very small community that remains on the island. So I traveled all over Cuba, finding Jews wherever I could find them in this very small community of 1,000 or possibly less. And I found this man, Jaime Gans Green, who is the last Jew living in a small town on the eastern end of Cuba, Palma Soriano. And interestingly enough, he had all these documents that he'd never shown anybody. And I just said to him, oh, do you have pictures, letters, anything? And he just opened a drawer and started showing me all kinds of things that he had kept of relatives who'd actually perished in the Holocaust and had sent letters and so on from Europe. So again, I think this picture is so fascinating what Humberto was able to achieve here in terms of showing, again, the relationship between past and present through this image. And these boys are holding up their conversion documents because they're Jewish on the father's side rather than the mother's side, and so they actually went through a conversion process. So this whole issue of claiming a Jewish identity and how that's done and how you need paperwork to prove it became one of the topics that I explored ethnographically, and also the tremendous American Jewish fascination with this community. It's a community that, like the Kung of the Kalahari Desert, have been studied and overstudied by many, many people who find them to be of great curiosity. So I don't know if I have time, but I also made, previous to this project, I actually made a documentary film called Adiós Querida. So I actually made the film first and then was very frustrated by all the stories I wasn't able to tell in the film. I gathered about 100 hours of footage and made an 82-minute documentary, and there were still so many other stories I wanted to tell. So actually, after making the film, I wrote the book, An Island Called Home, and you just saw some of the images from it. So I don't know if we have enough time to see this, do we not? This might be 3 minutes or so, this little clip. I mean, if not, I have some more images, and why don't I just go on, not to take up too much time. So anyway, you'll miss seeing my mother. That was a little clip of my mother talking about not totally feeling American yet, but we'll switch instead to this. This is a more recent project that I've been involved in. It's kind of another notion of the performative. I also write poetry. It was one of my first loves, and for me it's always been important to create beautiful things, whether I'm doing scholarship or other work, other writing, and this whole issue of being able to be a scholar artist, or Renato Rosaldo has that wonderful term, an anthropoet, an anthropoeta, and that's one of the things that I aspire to be, and I've really been able to work on the craft of writing in recent years by writing poems in English that I then translate into Spanish, and then I've been working with this book artist, Rolando Esteves, in Cuba, who really helps me to envision the work visually and performatively as a kind of stage for collage and drama, color, and sensuality. So this is a long, long narrative poem that I wrote called Broken Streets of My City, Las Calles Rotas de Mi Ciudad. And there's the cover in English and the cover in Spanish. So I wrote the poem, shared it with him, the two languages, and I'm referencing a couple of things in this poem and this idea of broken streets. The streets are actually very broken in Havana, and particularly in the neighborhood where I used to live in Havana, and this gives you at least a little bit of a sense of that. So it's very easy to trip and fall, and I normally wear heels, but actually on a day that I was wearing sneakers, I tripped and fell, and I'll go back to that. and didn't end up hurting myself, but sprained an elbow pretty badly, and it was my right elbow, so I had a lot of trouble writing. So it was this whole poem about tripping in Cuba, not being able to write, my right arm being out of commission, and it led me to think about various things that are broken in Cuba and broken in relations between Cubans on the island and Cubans who have left. And also thinking about brokenness in a Jewish sense. This is a tombstone in the cemetery, and a lot of the tombstones are very broken because so many people left in the early 60s and they haven't necessarily gone back to attend to the tombstones of their ancestors. So there's all this brokenness. But then there's also this Jewish custom of leaving stones at a grave. So we kind of, in a sense, embrace the brokenness or embrace the pieces of things. And so all those themes were themes that I tried to address in the poem. And I gave this picture to Esteves, the book artist, and it's a picture of my parents and me. It was a black and white picture, and then he hand colored it, and that forms part of the book. I should have brought the book so you could actually see it. And he hand wrote the poem out. So here's his beautiful calligraphy, and just a few lines from it. I come back, an old child, now they call me Señora. I still come back after so many years, an old little girl, una niña vieja. Mami, papi, please come back, walk these broken streets of our Habana together with me. Listen to me, your niña vieja. Let me lead you through these broken streets. My parents have never been back to Cuba, and so the irony that I've been back, probably 100 times, and my parents have never been back, and they're the ones with the memories. I'm the one that, has suffered from amnesia. And then another book, just to share a more recent one. So this is called Dos Mujeres, una isla, two womans, he translated it, one island. And this was a beautiful idea that Esteves came up with. He brought together a few poems of mine and a few poems by Nancy Morejon. And the idea was to bring together Nancy, who's an Afro-Cuban poet, lives on the island, travels a lot, and then me, a Jewish-Cuban poet who doesn't live on the island but goes back a lot, and to bring the two of us together. And so he does this mirroring thing, this beautiful picture, and then this idea of the two women birthing an island. And so her poems, Nancy's, are here in English and Spanish. And she's actually a very close friend of mine as well. And then some of my poems. And then in the center of the book, there's another picture that he's created. So anyway, all of that is, and there's more I could talk about. I also had a wonderful collaboration a number of years ago with Pregones, a New York-based theater group in New York who staged Translated Woman. But don't have time to talk about that. So just will conclude by saying that pleasure is not a concept we speak of very much in ethnography, but I think finding aesthetic pleasure in the work we do and creating beautiful things are important goals for us as ethnographers, or at least for me. Maybe I won't generalize for all of us. It's not an easily quantifiable thing. What are the criteria for beauty and aesthetic pleasure? But I think what you're doing here at Penn and what we're doing in other places as well to keep building academic communities where visual and performative work can be done, evaluated, revised, and taught is very important because it's the legitimation through pedagogy that's essential for creating new spaces in the academy. And I think also an issue that E. Patrick was bringing up, that this whole issue of expertise is an important one. And I think we're all going to have to, in a sense, double ourselves and study anthropology and kind of a double major, learn something else, whether it's creative writing or performance or photography or film. So we aren't dilettantes, so we aren't amateurish about what we do. And I'm finding more and more, a lot of these students end up finding me at Michigan, students that do anthropology and creative writing, or anthropology and music, or anthropology and dance. I could mention several of my students, Erica Lair, who did anthropology and museum studies and is doing incredibly innovative work. Umi Vaughn, who does anthropology and music and photography, can do all the dances for the Orishas, really an incredibly talented person. Vanessa Diaz, who's been studying celebrity culture in Hollywood. And she comes from a background in journalism, so studying anthropology and journalism. Lara Stein-Pardo, who comes from a background in the visual arts and mixing visual arts and anthropology. She has a fascinating project mapping the arts in Miami. So I think that's part of what we're going to have to do, in a sense, is double ourselves in order to keep doing inspiring work and finding ways to join the rational mind and the beating heart to provide a sense of the mysterious strangeness of life. So I'll just end with 3 lines from poet Szymborska, who said, "The joy of writing, the power of preserving, revenge of a mortal hand." Thank you.
Unfortunately, we're very much behind schedule, so we're not going to be able to take any questions, but I do hope that you will join me in thanking again our panelists who have started the day, and we will come back and revisit what they have said throughout the rest of the program. So thank you very much.
Okay, just a little housekeeping note. Hey. So yeah, as Regina said, we're a little bit behind time. I'm going to catch us up by cutting the coffee break shorter than it was scheduled for, knowing that we would be out of time. So what we're going to do is hopefully during coffee you can ask whatever questions you have, and of course we'll have all day to have these conversations in an ongoing kind of way. I want to ask Sophia to come up because, as you know, after the coffee break at 11:15, Deb is going to do a theater workshop, and in the afternoon, two of the students from camera, I think Sophia and Gabriel, are going to do a workshop for which we are now going to find out our assignment. So after Sophia tells us, we'll reconvene at 11:15 for Deb's workshop.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So as I share these instructions, Mariam is going to pass them out. It's just a quick activity that you can do in maybe 5 minutes during the coffee break, or you can pass them out. And so before 2:30 today, when Gabriel and I will facilitate the ethnography and multimodality workshop, we're asking you to maybe put on your ethnographer hats and do a couple of things. Find a partner, and together with your partner, choose either a process, an interaction, an object, or a space that you want to capture. And one person will do it in text, and the other person will do it in a non-textual format. There's more outside on the table. And you can interpret that as you wish. And you can send your pieces to me. My email address is on this little piece of paper. And just label your work with camera and the name of you and your partner. And I will assemble these so that we can use those for the workshop at 2:30. So, thanks.
Just quickly, for those of you who might be coming back to play in another 15 or so minutes, I'd like to use this floor. So I'm thinking, please don't leave things on the floor or on the chairs. I'm thinking the best way to sort of use this room is to put chairs on this side so that people are welcome to be here as spectators, and some chairs on this side of the room, but all of maybe 7/8 of this floor will be here. So please don't leave things on your chairs. And if you want to help move things in this direction and make things on chairs over there, against the wall, you can do that. Thank you.
going to put it back behind stage. So they're just going to be sitting in chairs, and as we're going to roll the TV out, towards the very end of the program, we'll pull the table back out. Sorry. Keep the mic down there for now.
So at some point, are you going to actually have that camera there so they can see the audience? Or?
Yeah, the person, you know, they're going to be going into the TV, but this way they can at least see. We're not going to have to go up on the screen. She doesn't want to make a huge shoot.
Right.
So yeah, we've already tested this out as well.
Yeah. So that camera is solely just for that stream up there. Yeah, I thought maybe there was like some sort of magnet or a switch or something.
Yeah, no. That's just so her on the other side of the Skype can see. See the groove, basically. But that's after lunch.
session where we're going to play and get on our feet. So please stand up if you want to participate and just come forward. This is your chance now. There can be people observing, but I'm going to invite you all to come here. We'll make a circle, get comfortable, take off your shoes if you want to take off your shoes. This is not a notebook kind of thing for those who are here in the circle. So just come, show up and play, ready to play. Do what you want. I'm going to take off my shoes. I'd like to do that. We'll form a circle. I would love for the people who want to play and participate for the next 40 minutes to be here now in the circle. If you feel like you need to wait and decide and look at us and decide whether you want to join or not and join in later, that's okay. We'll take late joiners. But the benefits of this practice really are best experienced if you start with the group and be in a group and move with a group throughout. So my name is Deborah Spitolnik-Vidali. I'm faculty in anthropology at Emory University. And just the rules are get comfortable and take care of yourself, first of all. So we're going to get in a circle and just begin to do some warm-ups. And the first thing that I want to do is everybody just try to create a uniform circle, backing up, and there we go. This is a nice circle, great. And so what I want us to do is just look around and see who's here in this circle, who's here with the observers. If you want to join the circle, come on and we'll make space for you. We're going to be on our feet playing for about 40 minutes. And what I'd like to do is demo some of the techniques that we use in ethnographic theater. Many of them are very familiar to people who do theater in general. They're warm-ups, they're theater games. We're not going to use our jaw too much and project our voices and the kind of things that actors do, but we'll do things for getting in the body and being able to experience other dimensions of sensation, also to feel a kind of connection in the group. So these sort of energetic exercises that are very common in the world of performing arts and theater, those are things that I do a lot. And then the second half of what we'll be doing here in this workshop is a little bit more content-oriented towards the creation of material. And of course, in this really short time that we have today, we're not going to create a project. But what I hope is that you get a taste of what it's like to create a project, what it's like to incubate a project. Some of the projects I showed you this morning, I showed you examples of them. And some of them are very fast-track projects where basically we're in the moment, we have a process, we get a project up on its feet in a matter of hours or just 2 or 3 days, and it is what it is. It's got that ephemerality, but it's got a reality of documenting the human condition and giving voice to some of the stories that people want to tell. And it is what it is. It's not a polished product that can be evaluated in some big way, but it is something that is ethnographic, and that's what I want us to think about is the potentials of this kind of work for producing things that are episodic, ephemeral, process-based, and even nomadic. What we produce here might actually travel to Denver. You might not travel to Denver, but some of the material that comes out of the next few minutes together may be some of the content that folds into an ethnographic project down the line. So I'd like to invite us to think about theater projects, generative theater projects, and ethnographic theater projects as being collaborative, multiply owned. Yeah, you're not on board. Feel free to go sit down, exactly, but something you create here today might be picked up by somebody. It's kind of like a relay race of ethnographic theater where a piece of content that we run with here is passed off to somebody else down the line. So I don't know if this is going to work. It's a total experiment, and my time is shrinking. Let's warm up, okay? So if we just want to shake off what we've come in with and shake off the right arm, shake off the left arm, shake off the right leg, shake off the left leg, shake around, wiggle, 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 jiggle, 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 shake your money maker, and just move around, okay? Have some fun and feel that body and feel a different way to be in the body. And now what we'll do, super quick, we're going to move through a lot of really quick warm-up things, and take care of yourself. If you need to sit down or you need to slow down, it's okay. But I would like you to kind of stick with me on a little bit of this warm-up stuff. And now we can stop. And I don't know if we're an odd or even number, and I don't want to take time to count. So just find somebody straight across from you and point to that person, establish eye contact. If you don't have somebody, that means we've got a odd number, I guess, so maybe you figure it out if somebody needs to have two people that they're looking at. How are we doing here? Does everybody have one person that they've identified? Point, just make sure you know you've got one, try and get one person. Does anybody have more than one person that you've got nobody? Does anybody, nobody? Try and get it to be somebody directly across. Can we work this out somehow? Okay, so you're going to move to the, okay, does everybody have somebody that we've got? Oh, sorry, I had you. Okay, maybe we can back up. Okay. Everybody? Sorry? No. Okay. Let's sort this all out. Let's go around the circle. So I have you. Who do you have? You want the... Who doesn't have somebody? Who doesn't have somebody?
We need one more person. We need another person.
All right, so this is just another, we good? Okay, thank you, awesome. Maybe we can back up and make a little more of a circle, yeah, instead of a bumpy amoeba. All right, so we're gonna do a kind of warm-up exercise, probably familiar to many of you in the theater world, where you have a soft focus on the person directly across from you. And I'm going to start to do some movements, and you will follow me. So people don't, you're the one that you can look at me, but others, so soft focus on me and try to follow what your partner is doing, try to follow what the person across from you is doing, and somehow synchronize this set of coordinated warm-ups. So I'll get us started. Lovely, good. All right, now we're going to do something that is about getting a little bit more into, well, let's just do it. Okay, so I am going to pass a sound to my right. You will turn to your right, you'll pass that sound. The sound will have a gesture, and we'll see how the sound and the gesture morph and expand as we go around the room. So there's no right or wrong, well, just whatever you're moved by. You'll be receiving something from your left, and you'll pass it to your right. Okay? Rrr. Woo! Ah. That was beautiful. You guys are all theater people, I know. You're like, what is this? Okay. Great. So more on that note, and I'm going to go to my left this time. I am going to say my name and something that I love. So 2 words, the thing, my name and the thing that I love. And each of those will be accompanied with a gesture. The person on my left, the person on our left, will hear that and repeat back the name and the gesture, looking straight at the person who gave them. But they will be amplified 2 times. So the name will be said twice as loud, and the gesture will be made twice as loud. And then the passion that I'll be saying with my name will be said twice as loud, along with the gesture. So this is a game called Name and Passion. So after I say it, you repeat back to me, then you'll swivel to your left, and you'll give the same to Peter, okay? Well, you give your name and your passion to Peter, okay? So, you ready? Deb, yoga.
Deb, yoga. Jesse, purple.
Jesse Purple. Peter House.
Peter House. Myrtle Love. Myrtle Love. Roxanne Chocolate.
Roxanne Chocolate. Jose Poetry.
Jose Poetry. Marcel Eggs. Marcel Eggs. Keisha Touch. Aaliyah Sleep. Aaliyah Sleep. Amber the Ocean.
Amber. Robert. Filmmaking. Robert. Filmmaking. Diego. Art.
Diego Art. Mario Coffee Ice Cream. Lauren Coffee Ice Cream. Sophia Good Wine.
Sophia, good wine. Okay, thank you guys. Nice, very nice. One other quick warm-up before we get to some content creation, and this game is called Pass the Clap or Catch the Clap. Who knows that game? You know that? Okay, great. And so again, this is something that's a kind of, building the team and group synchrony. Also just getting in your body, playing, and just experiencing different levels of emotionality, including fear of losing. So what do? We're not going to play it as a process of elimination game. We don't have time. But there are a few rules. You will get a clap, and you catch the clap at the same time that it's delivered to you. When you catch the clap, you also catch the eye contact. And the eye contact. So eye gaze, clap, they're caught. And we'll keep a beat. We'll keep a very, very simple beat since many of you are beginners with this game. So the beat will go like this. I will pass the clap once. You catch it at the same time with the eye gaze. And you swivel to your right and pass it to the next person. So that's how the game works at the simple level, and we'll just go around the circle, passing one beat at a time, swiveling. If we mess up, it's okay. We'll start again. We'll just keep going, all right? Swivel. Okay, let's speed it up.
Sorry.
Let's try that beat, okay? Ready? Try and speed it up. Yeah. Okay, great, you guys. That was really good. Now, in a process of elimination game, Peter would be out and we would narrow and narrow down until we have like the total. So yeah, there you go. But we kept you in. Let's do it one more time with a different rule. We won't do process of elimination, but we'll do a rule which means you can swivel to the right as we've been, or you can swivel to the left, or you can own that clap back and forth, doing lots of swiveling. Don't do it too long because we don't want to just look at you and your neighbors. But let's see what we can do to change up the direction, okay? Let's try and keep that fast beat too. Do you think you can do it? Want to try it? Okay. It's okay. It's all right. I'm going to cut it. You guys continue. That's right. Great, you guys. You were wonderful. I love how you changed it up and started to shoot it across the circle. That's really lovely. So we're not going to take a lot of time to give verbiage to what we just did and process it. We can do that later, buzzing over lunch or whatever. But there's a lot of interesting ways that the group becomes attuned to, we become attuned to each other. We're in our bodies in very different ways with respect to time, space, sound, physicality, and play. It's lovely. I'm going to change it up a little bit now and get to some things that are more about content creation. And so there's this lovely tool called the human barometer. I'm going to establish a barometer with 2 poles of the barometer, and I'm going to give you guys a frame that you'll answer, and you'll place yourselves on the human barometer. So the human barometer is going to be let's say we set up the spectrum here with this point on the stage being strongly agree, okay? So when I say this frame, you're going to answer strongly agree or strongly disagree, and you'll put yourself on the barometer. So if you strongly agree, you're going to be here, and you can be anywhere on the spectrum all the way down to here of strongly disagree, all right? So I'll read the frame, you place yourself on the spectrum. You don't need to stand shoulder to shoulder. If you want this point and 3 other people want this point, figure it out, battle for your point, whatever. It doesn't have to be perfectly elegant or linear. Let's just do this, okay? So strongly agree and strongly disagree, okay? And here's the frame. You already know you're going to agree. That's lovely. The frame is, I have enough time to do what I want to do. And let's say dead center is, yeah, right here, okay? I have enough time. And could you guys turn around so we're going to be facing? I have enough time to do what I want to do. And look at that spectrum. More people are clustering on the negative end. So this is an interesting piece of ethnographic data that we can activate in all kinds of ways. It's the self-report of the individuals here in the room. I have enough time to do the work that I want to do. And wow, this is lovely. There's a lot of people who are feeling like, yeah, they're strongly agree. Well, nobody is actually extremely strongly, like right here or beyond the end point. So you didn't choose to do that, which is also an interesting factoid. And oh my God, these poor people, we need to give some hours to them. Okay, so let's play with this. So now I could interview you all and say, why did you stand where you stood? But we don't have time for that, and we're not going to take time. No time to interview you all, but hey, what can we do? I'm going to ask you to think about why you're there right now in the point that you picked and how you feel about this stance that you've taken. Not having time, having time. What feelings sort of came up for you as you made the decision to place yourself on the human barometer? And I'm going, don't do anything yet, but I'm going to ask you to think of a body statue that conveys that feeling of why you're standing where you're standing. What set of emotions or comportments or your relation to time would be put into a body statue to convey your choice? Don't make it yet. And I'm going to count to 3 and ask you to all strike the pose. So the audience will see the statues that are conveying your lived reality that puts you at the spot on the human barometer, okay? So I'm going to count to 3. Are you ready for a statue? 1, 2, 3. Strike the pose. Beautiful. I have enough time to do the work that I want to do. Audience, what do you see? Now we'll interview you to say, what do you see about these humans' relations to time and the frame of strongly agree, disagree to that single question? Okay, let's unfreeze the top part of the barometer. Guys, you can relax. Remember your pose. Let's keep you as much as you can. Let's look at this side of the barometer. Anybody want to buzz about what they see in the statues? Time is a monster. Anything else? Staring at the watch. Reading a book. And the emotional contours that we see on this second half. Anything that you might want to say? Just stress, despair, looking down. Book reader could be fine, just very immersed. Okay, so there's layers of interpretation we can do. And again, we don't have time, oh, bad pun. We don't have time to fully unpack what we're seeing. But I just want to demo for you the process of how we might get some material and what we would do with it for an ethnographic investigation and personal storytelling around a topic like time and work. Let's unfreeze the second half, and if you guys can strike your poses, 1, 2, 3, let's see what the people who do have time or have more time than these guys, and what do we see on this end? Anybody want to buzz about what they see over here? Relations to time, feelings about time. More bodies are up, more faces are relaxed. Certainly there's significant contrast points across the 2 ends of the spectrum. What else do you see? being fed up. Yeah. And similarity. In the middle is feeling somewhat different than the two poles. So again, this is a very incomplete project right now, but it gives you a sense of what we might do with embodiment, with frames that are used to instigate a kind of reaction in a quick way with a big group. All right, you guys can unfreeze. That was beautiful. I'm going to give you another frame to play with. So you can come off the human barometer and just loosen up a little bit, mill around, and so on. We will have one human barometer that says, let me just check the time, by the way, if I could. Okay, I've got 10 more minutes. Here we go. We're going to do another barometer with the strongly agree and strongly disagree. The middle dead center is here. And here's the frame. Where I work, people understand what I do. Okay? Where I work, people understand what I do. Strongly agree, strongly disagree. Different kind of spectrum, different kind of distribution across this population. And again, we're not going to get into the backstories of what this self-selecting group of people who are here today to experiment with theater and performance and visuality, but you know, we've got lovely, and beyond support, wow. And then a spectrum here that you guys are interesting, just that you've lined up shoulder to shoulder, where you've clustered, so even that might be telling us a story, right? A story about not just the individual answer to this question, but a collectivity that, I don't know, this is a collectivity that somehow is, supported by their collectivity, and your very gathering is somehow iconic, whereas these are individual automatons. I don't know where I would go with that, but just this little snapshot of bodies on a line or not on a line is giving me more questions if, say, for example, my research was about our relations to our workplaces. So it's, again, just a little bit of play and a snapshot that generates some stuff that might be seeds to be taken up in a later project. Who knows? But before we leave this barometer, let's think about statues too. So if you could think, and I'll do the count of 3 again. If you could think about just what is this story that puts you here in the spot that you're at? The people where I work get what I do. The people at work, people where I work don't get what I do. Or I have the support I need, or I don't have the support I need. What's that story? And how does that story make you feel right now in a way that you could perhaps, in a single moment of a statue, just embody it? That statue out there in the campus, the statue of that person that has support or doesn't, or whatever word you want to use. Okay, so you got a statue, you've got a body inhabitants in mind. Count to 3 and strike your pose. 1, 2, 3. Beautiful. Yeah, what do you guys see? Anybody want to buzz about the far end? What do we see? How about if we get you to talk? This end, what do you see down there? You guys can unfreeze and talk about them. What's that? Whatever you'd like to do. What do you see? What do you want to say? Good, lovely. Ask you guys to create your poses again, and you can unfreeze and talk about what you see down there with this end of the people who strongly agree with the statement that they have support and people get them at their work. What do y'all see? Want to buzz a little bit about what you see at this far end? Firm, yeah. It's like, just doing what I do. Just do what I do. Yeah. So we might sort of describe in specific ways, or we might have slogans or phrases, or as you did, Peter, you might have an interaction with the other side. Any verbalization of what you see and what you want to say is, there's no rules here, right? This is just all generating material and conversations. Yeah, see you. There we go. Zoom in on the Zoomer. That's fun. So we can play with these. This is an example of frames. So we can unfreeze the side. I'm going to do one final exercise, and then we'll have a closing circle, and we can process all we want over lunch or later in the day. But one final exercise. You guys are great. So this one is not a human barometer, but it's called Find a Group. It is, again, a frame that we can use in theater, but also in ethnographic content generation. We think of this as an analogous to like a focus group activity. I'm not going to just drop something in there and we all buzz about it, but I'm going to drop something here, and I'm going to just ask you to think of one word, and then you'll buzz about that. So in a movement, in an embodied sense, you will wander around and try to find a group that shares the word that you chose. Find a group. Make a group. I'm going to give you a frame, and you might not find anybody that answered the frame in the same way. So what if I said, find a group based on what you ate for breakfast? And you ate oatmeal, and you had a croissant. You find each other because they're carbohydrates. But nobody else ate oatmeal, and nobody else ate a croissant. Something like that. You find a group, you make a group, you create a group. Find people to cluster with based on your answer to this frame, okay? So don't say the word yet. I need you to think of one word, which is the one word that it is taboo to say in my workplace is bon, fill in the blank. The one word that is taboo to say in my workplace, fill in the blank. Find a group based on the word that you have. So now you can circulate and buzz and say your word under your breath. You have a word? Pick a word. What came to mind first when I gave you the frame? Everybody got a word? The one word that's taboo in my workplace, with respect to work and the work you do, not just, like a dirty word or something, but, sorry. So let me specify that frame a little bit better. The one word that it's taboo or illegal or just kind of dangerous to say where I work in relation to the work that I do. The one word. Pick a word. It's not a test, okay? So let's just kind of move with this. Pick a word for the fun of it. You guys ready? Okay, find a group based on the word you chose. Everybody find a group. You don't have to find a group if you really are an N of one. Change your, no, not now, but that could generate down the line. But if you can be an N of one, you can be an island with your word. That's okay. There's no real right or wrong here. So just for the sake of time, let's stop the exercise where we are. Stay where you are with your group. So what's the sort of overarching theme of this group? Can't. Thank you. Disagreement. Okay, so you found each other based on struggles over objectivity. Okay, great. It's more than one word, but a similar concept, yeah. And what was your word? Ego. Didn't have a word? Excellent, yeah. Racist. Did you have the same word, or did you find that that was sort of the discrimination? So your group formed around that idea of inclusion, exclusion. Yeah, excellent, great. So we don't have a lot of time, we're probably like 30 seconds left, but this exercise, again, generates questions around cultural categories, the words we come in with, the words we might grow and expand or contract with as we find each other to make categories. And it's sort of an implicit form of cultural analysis if you guys, had a sort of similar concept and then you agree that there's an overarching concept that unites it. It also has shown us the spectrum of things that people struggle with, particularly with respect to this concept of, what's working and what's not working in my workplace, and what are the things that maybe I want to talk about that people are backing off of or worried about, and the kind of obstacles that you might have in the work that you do because you pick that word because it's something that you're bumping up against, right? So again, we're doing a form of ethnographic investigation into cultural categories and lived realities through this kind of buzzing that we've just done, finding a group and not having a word. Maybe this just the exercise is not working, it's okay, and you can add a word or change a word as you move through the exercise. There's so many permutations of how we might use these frames in this kind of movement work to create ethnographic content and ethnographic insights. So hopefully you've gotten a taste of that. What I want to do before we do a closing circle is just one kind of final sort of auditory experience of what you just produced here with your words. And so there's a frame that's called popcorn. And if you could imagine popcorn, when it pops, pop, 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 without a rhythmic beat, whenever it's ready. Multiple pieces of corn can pop at the same time, or there could be a lull in the popping. Let's try to create a popcorn-like sound with a single shout out of the word that you picked. And you don't have a word, so you can pick a word. Pick a word now that you're going to pop with. And pop when you're ready to pop. I'm going to count to 3, and I'll just say, like the heat's on and all these kernels are getting heated up. And I'll count to 3, and some of them will start to pop. And all you do is shout your word out. If you want to add a gesture, great. So you'll do one pop. Maybe some will pop more than once. That's okay. All right? So the heat's on. 1, 2, 3. Popping can start. Wonderful, you guys. You just produced a pop-up piece, no pun intended. You produced a pop-up piece on what it's like to do your work. That's beautiful. Let's get a circle. We'll close in. That was a short performance, if you didn't notice, right? We'll do a warm-up circle, and the warm-up circle is very simple. Sorry, not warm-up, closing circle. Thank you. Yeah, where am I? Closing circle is very simple. I am going to, in synchrony, we'll go left foot stomp, right foot stomp, left foot stomp, right foot stomp, left foot stomp, right foot stomp, arms up in the air with whatever joyful release, beauty, gratitude, thanks to Deb, or whatever, this Deb, where she's there. Whatever you want to do with your last release. So, oh, I'm sorry, I forgot the clap. It's stomp, stomp, clap, stomp, stomp, clap, stomp, stomp, clap, woo. Okay, so you ready? Let's do it. Woo! All right, thanks, guys. Great work. Thank you. Thank you, audience. Thank you. Well done. Thank you. Thank you. That's it. Thanks. Nice prize. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Hi, everyone. Just a reminder that the directions for the 2:30 workshop are up on the screen. So if you haven't found a partner and you want to participate in this, it would be good to do over lunch. Thanks.
Lunch is right up there.
I got some good notes.